Well, hi, and welcome back, Dr. G, to another podcast episode. It's a real pleasure once more to talk with you, and thank you for taking the time. For
Oh,
those
I'm
who
very excited to always talk to you, Alex.
thank you. It's a real pleasure. And for those new viewers and listeners just joining us, Dr. Howard Gluss, also known as Dr. G, is one of the most respected and experienced counselors and therapists in the United States, and certainly has a very strong international footprint as well. So it's a real pleasure to have you here today, Dr.
Thank you,
G.
Alex.
Thank you. And I'm actually really excited today because we've spoken about a lot of issues around addiction. But today it's something I think we're looking very specifically at um, your role in the treatment of addiction. And my understanding in and belief is that you have recently um, put the finishing touches to what is called the Gluss Method, which is your own personal program.
Sort of
Which
my own
delivers
personal take on treatment as a clinical
absolutely.
psychologist, my take
There we go.
on how to approach addiction.
Fantastic. So yeah,
So, okay.
really
So, well, first of all, thank you for that. And I really appreciate it. You know, Alex, I've been a clinical psychologist for over 20 years, and most of that time I've spent working in addiction. And, over the years, I feel like I've gained a lot of personal insight into what I think works and what I think doesn't work, and what best way to approach a client or a patient. So over the years, I started to play with this concept of, well, I started to notice that I seem to have my own method, my own approach that has evolved over these years. And people have encouraged me to start writing a book, talking on videos, talking on these podcasts about what my specific approach was. So I started to call it, well, we'll just call it the Gluss Method, since that's my last name. This is my personal way of doing it. So on this podcast, I want to talk about, there's really 7 principles I've thought about, but I just want to tackle 2 or let's say 3 of them on this podcast. So what I wanted to say to you is that it really is a paradox. This is the first principle. What I mean by a paradox is, and I feel like there should be a drum roll. Here's the big drum roll explaining what the Gluss Method is. There really is no Gluss Method. So people say to me, well, what do you mean by that? You're trying to sell a Gluss Method, and then you tell me that there is no Gluss Method. What I mean by that is this specifically. I think that addiction is extremely complex. I think that people that will be attracted to the name, the Gluss Method, may think that there's a simple way of dealing with addiction. Oh, this guy, this psychologist, is going to give me a cookbook, paint by number description method on what I should do, and with that, I'll gain sobriety. So I want to say that actually the Gluss Method is my method about how I work with people and dealing with addiction, and my own personal insights into my own life. But what I want people to do, the challenge that I want them to take, is create your own method. There are so many things, treatments out there. Pick and choose what works for you. Make it your own, the way I'm about to make my own. So I do have some specific tenets that I've discovered and principles, and I'm going to share them. But I want people to go, okay, those are great. Those are Dr. Gluss's methods, but maybe I have some other ideas that will work too. So hopefully by the end of this series, people will come up with their own idea, and then it'll be the Alex method, the the Bentley method, whatever it is. But I want people to be creative, because Alex, in the end, it's your voice. I can't go into your body, into your mind to such a degree to understand what is going to work for you. I almost feel that's very arrogant. But what I could offer is some suggestions as to what I think works when you're dealing with addiction. So that's the first principle, is I want people to come up with their own method. I'm going to give you mine. I challenge you, Alex, also come
Yeah.
up with your own, because it's really complicated. And if you're looking for a simple answer, you're not going to find it.
Mm.
It's this dynamic that has to come together to really, solidify. And also, whatever approach you develop, it's going to change over time because you as a human being are changing over time. So what you discovered about yourself now may be different, years from now. But if you're someone who's dealing with sobriety, it's a lifelong process. So you have to always take into account, what issues you're dealing with in your life and where your physical body is and where your mental state is. So saying that, the first real big principle that I wanted to share with everyone is I try to divide the person and the disease. So what I mean by that is I understand that alcoholism, addiction is definitely a disease. There are people that could drink and have no problem stopping. And there are people that can have one cocktail, one beer, and that's it. They cannot stop. There's something in their genetics, in their makeup that just doesn't, they just can't stop. They binge. So a lot of those people are dealing with a very strong genetic predisposition for addiction. So that's what I mean when there's a disease. And we have to always have that in mind, that when we're dealing with someone, especially at the beginning stages, when we're trying to get them into some sort of sane place to start dealing with their lives through a detox, etc., we're really focused on the disease. But once the disease gets a little stabilized, the way I like to work, and I'll call it the Gluss method, is then we start working on the person. Like, who are you? What has caused you to, create this in your life? What are the underlying psychological issues that we have to look at in order to get you stronger, in order to get you more in control of your life, more able to have free will and choices that you want to make, that your life isn't just reactive and, to events. So I try to focus a lot on who that human being is and who that person is. I feel like a lot of programs, Alex, they're so focused on the disease and getting disease under control, and then people leave rehab and they still are clueless. They don't know what their passions are, who they are. They haven't discovered that. And if you can get people into that place where they start to get a sense of, who am I without all the drugs, without all the behavioral addictions? Who is that human being? Maybe that human being has failed to launch. You could fail to launch and be 40, has never really experienced a true sense of themselves, a passion. You start to introduce that. My hope, and I sort of in my head cross my fingers, I've seen happen is, if people have that experience of self and that experience of wellness, and they start to actually like it, and they like who they are, and they are not maybe consumed with, low self-esteem, etc., they may not want to go back to the disease. They may not want to go back to that place. They want to, that's the hope, keep moving forward in their life. So to me, that's so important in my approach, is I really like to focus on who the person is. Not saying I ignore the disease. Of course, that's part of it. And we need stability, because if a person's drinking or using a lot of drugs or gambling a lot, there's really no one to talk to. So you got to get that under control. But then I want to know who you are.
Yeah. Well, I think it's so interesting. And what my take on it, and what I love about it, is that everything that you've discussed and explained, I think is the mainstay of personalized and individualized treatment. And as you rightly said, in terms of treatment centers, if you're in a treatment center with 5 or 6 people, for example, they still
Right,
have to deliver a program, so
right.
something that's relevant to everybody there. And I think what's so different and so refreshing about you and your approach is that truly personalized and truly individualized, and and completely person centric. So I'm really really impressed by everything that you've just said. I think
Well,
it's
I
a
think it's, you know what
great
I think
approach.
so too, is that people, if you can get to that place, Alex, where you can start to feel yourself and get in touch with your intuition and start to feel the feelings that you need to feel, and you're not so terrified of it,
Mm,
you, you know, then it becomes yours. And so many times we have everybody, even mental health professionals, the world, they're telling us who we should be, what we should do. And I feel like a lot of people eventually start to resent that. It's almost like another parent telling us who to be. But if it becomes your own and you can learn to take responsibility for that, you actually might really enjoy it
mm,
and get off on it. Now, I also want to say, I'm not negating any, in my approach, I don't negate any other program. I don't feel like anything has to be mutually exclusive. If somebody comes in and they say, you know, I'm really into the program, 12-step program, I go, fantastic. Let me also add this to your repertoire. See if any of this resonates. That's what I meant by the earlier statement that there is no
mm,
specific method. You've got to create your own. So take whatever works for you. You know, I encourage a lot of people to go to 12-step meetings all the time. I'll say, you know what? Even if you're not that into it, chances are by the end of the meeting, you'll have picked up at least a couple of good nuggets, a couple of good moments of inspiration. So, and you're going to get a community that supports you. So I think
absolutely.
that's so important too.
And
Um,
I just to interrupt you as well there. I wanted to, because a burning question has just popped up for
sure.
me, and I'm like, I'm thinking about it. I'm like, yeah, absolutely. But I'm sure that I'm not alone in having asked the question to myself. Okay, who am I, and what do I want to achieve in life? Right? What's my purpose? Lots of people have said, oh, you know, everybody in this world seems to know what their purpose is. You know, they're like,
Oh,
you
they
know,
pretend to know.
people are on their missions, and I'm like, I'm always sitting there, I'm like, my God, these people have got it sussed. There are certain times when I think and I plan and I strategize the business, for example, and I'm like, is this my purpose? Is this actually making me happy? But to think about what else would make me happy, I find that it's a very difficult um, introspective place to get to.
And I want to answer, it's not just what do I want to do, but who do I want to be?
Mm,
What kind of person do I want to be is so important too. Because it's really a great question, because people ask me all the time, what's your passion? How do I said, just start, you know, just get into I hate using the word process, but it's a simple word to do. Maybe the passion will grow on you. You know, a lot of times we don't know what it is, but we just start we go like, well, I think it's this, so I'm going to move in this direction. And you go, oh, okay. It's not, you know, it's not just what I like choose on the surface. Like one of the things you get asked as a psychologist all the time is, what's the population that you like to work with? You know, do you like to work with, you know, depressed people or an ADHD? And I always say, I always think like, I just want to work with people that really want to work at what they're doing, because if they work at it, and I feel this is what I'm searching for that inspires me, I start to feel that connection. I don't really care. That's what I meant. I don't really care that much about what the disease is. I care about what the person is. If they are into getting better, I want to work with them. That's the kind of person that inspires me the most. So whether it's someone who's struggling with addiction, anxiety, and usually it's all of it, because usually, you know, chances are if you're doing a lot of drugs, you're pretty depressed, but we can't get to the depression until we
mm,
get rid of the drugs, because we don't know what's going on. So and this goes into my second point, Alex, about the Gluss method, is these are, again, principles I've discovered. I really feel that addiction is a state of non-existence. Now I'm going to get very philosophical.
Yep.
A lot of people talk about addiction as a sense of detachment, and I believe that's definitely part of it. But I feel, and maybe this is splitting hairs, but I feel it's a sense of non-existent, that a lot of times that person that's crippled with addiction, they never launched, they never really even metaphorically existed. There's no personhood there. And so that terror of feeling so empty that you've never developed enough, I think creates so much terror and anxiety for people that they look towards drugs or behavioral addiction to constantly be filling up that place. And, you know, things that cause us to feel that way, like when we're detached from people or we're detached from certain experience, it's almost like we don't exist because we're very social creatures. So I've really seen it. Like that's what I keep telling you, I deal with the person. How do I get that person to exist, to be present and in the moment? Because when you're in addiction, you're somewhere else. You're in a trauma, you're in a past relationship, you know, and then you put the substances and that's all. Then you're dealing with the reality of the substance. Like you're not even dealing with the person anymore. You're dealing with someone's on meth, you're dealing with speed, you're dealing with their mind on meth. You don't even know where that person is. So I think that I think it's so important to recognize that we got to get people who are, you know, using substances to try to understand that they've got to exist. They've got to like be so present, and the more present they can be, I think that helps deal with a lot of anxiety, a lot of depression. They're just connected and in the moment. And you know, I'm not opposed to medication. If medication helps, you know, part of the packet, it's part of the treatment, absolutely. For certain people, absolutely.
Right. That's that. That's going to take a little while to process all of that. It's very interesting. And I'd love to talk in more detail through different elements of the Gluss method. I'm sure we're going to do that as well. So,
but we can always come back and deal with that principle of non-existence.
Absolutely. One for next week.
You know, even this, Alex, think about this. A lot of people, you know, who suffer from addiction, this whole theory, and again, it's complex. They may have very narcissistic parents. And so the only way the child ever feels validated might be because they serve the needs of the parent. So the parent needs them to be a certain person. So they become that person, even unconsciously. But then they're always being reactive to what the parent needs them to be. Because they go, oh, when you know you're a certain way, you know, mommy loves Johnny. But if you're expressing yourself and it doesn't fit her need of who she needs you to be, she may be very disapproving or disengaging, which can create a lot of anxiety. But what happens is that real person never really develops, never really exists. And so a lot of emptiness can be experienced. And that emptiness is terrifying for people. If you really take it to the furthest point, it is like the fear of death. Because really, when do we non-exist the most? I know different people have religious beliefs, but still, at least on this planet, is when we die. So I've seen people go to that place therapeutically of, you know, in the end, it's this terrible fear of dying. And a lot of times it's really translate this terrible fear of living. They just can't find a way to live without substances.
Well, that's absolutely profound. It's and you're right, that fear of realizing that emptiness exists, feel, you know, that your life, that a life is empty, is, you know, that there is no footprint, or I mean, I think that's I think
There's
it's
no
very, very good.
guarantees, and that's such a scary place. I experienced it too as a psychologist.
Yeah,
Well, everybody wants to come in and I should answer that for them. And I go, I'm still working on it myself. I'll be
yeah,
working on it the rest of my life.
yeah. Wow,
But I try to embrace it, not
that's
run from
absolutely.
it.
It's so interesting, and I'm sure will resonate with lots and lots of people. Just a quick one to
Sure.
summarize at the end. Dr. G. Excuse me. All of your contact details are going to be on the next slide at the end. But what would be the steps for somebody if this if this really resonates with someone, and I'm sure it will. What are the steps to get in contact with you? Is it best
Sure,
to
absolutely. The easiest way is to contact me, Alex, through my website,
okay?
which is Darren on Health.
Hmm.
And over there's all the contact information. And Darren on Health, it really goes along with my whole philosophy and the reason I created it. It is a in-home drug and alcohol rehab approach that is very personalized, and we try to build the program around the person, not the person fitting into a program. So of course, like I said, we always go for stability first, because unless someone's sober enough, you can't really do this work. So that is a big part of, if someone needs a medical detox, etc. But I also found that there's a certain person that does really well when you work in their environment, whether it's on, through telehealth or, in person, or usually a hybrid of both programs. So we actually get to be in their environment. We actually get to meet their family. We actually get to meet their spouses. It's not like they're away somewhere and then they have to come back. So we work with everybody. Like, you can't, that's the coming up next on the Gluss program. Is the approach is really about a holistic family approach, because you can't just work with one person and then put them in a toxic environment, especially when they're newly sober and they don't have the skills yet or the fortitude to deal with it.
Wonderful.
And we shouldn't expect them to. So that's Darren on Health, DARAKNOT health.com. All my contact information is there.
Wonderful. Great. And Dr. G, thank you so much for an interesting discussion yet again. Thank you.
I really appreciate it. Thank you, Alex.